Okay, so today my presentation topic is anti-Black institutional racism in Canada, sectoral analysis and social work response. And my name is Florence, and welcome to my presentation. Today I will be talking about three main important sections, but more about healthcare, criminal justice, education, and environment. So I will be describing how anti-Black institutional racism is manifested in those sectors, and then analyze how these policies affect the well-being of Black Canadians, and also propose social work practice to address institutional racism. Introduction. So let's go straight to the presentation. Anti-Black racism has long been embedded within Canada's institutional institutions, despite the country's multicultural identity and commitment to equality. While Canada is often portrayed as a society that embraces diversity and inclusion, Black Canadians continue to experience systemic barriers across multiple sectors, including healthcare, um, criminal justice, education, and the environment. Black Canadians, one way or the other, they experience discriminations in various organizations. And the truth is, this doesn't just cut across organizations alone, but down to down to the black children experiencing this in their schools, amongst their friends. So these inequalities are not simply the result of individual prejudice, but are rooted in institutional policies, practices, and historical structures that disadvantage Black communities while privileging others. And then institutional racism refers to the ways organizations and systems create and sustain unequal outcomes through seemingly neutral policies, procedures, and practices that disproportionately affect racialized groups. One way or the other, Black people have been going through racism in their schools, in their in the organizations and all. And this really brought a personal experience to me. And not just personal, but I want to talk more about the common one that we all know, which is the George Floyd issue in 2020. Yeah, that was a terrible issue. And it was something that really brought tears into the eyes of so many Black people. And the government reports and research have recognized that systemic anti-Black racism contributes to health disparities, educational inequalities, criminal justice, overrepresentation, and overrepresentation and environmental injustice. So for social workers, addressing these structural inequalities is very essential in advancing social justice, human rights, advocacy for marginalized communities. Now, let's talk about the anti-Black racism in healthcare sectors. Yeah, so in healthcare, people go through various form of racism, and one of the form of racism that people go through when they are not being diagnosed well, they are not diagnosed or treated well, when they are being attended to or maltreated, or maybe you go to the hospital and they just treat you like you're not even in their front. That's totally bad. Other issues that black people go through, the women go through maternal health issues when they're not being responded to in the clinic or in the hospital, and it has led to high rates of complications and complications in pregnancies. And then there is poor birth outcomes due to systemic inequalities. Some nurses might even say that they don't treat black people like, oh, sorry, I can't touch you, you're black, you're this, people. And then mental health, some social workers or some mental health professionals, they just neglect, they just ignore speaking with supporting black people. They just have this, this unfair way of treating them. Then for COVID-19, during the COVID-19 period, so many black workers were at the front line, and they were not really treated so well. Some of them were affected due to systemic social and economic inequalities. Then the race-based data, limited collection of race-based health data delayed recognition of health disparities and hinder targeted policy responses. And then what are the impacts? Anti-black racism contributes to chronic stress, poor health outcomes, deaths. Yes, it leads to death because sometimes the black people can get depressed and just die, right, and commit suicide. And they can also lead to delayed healthcare seeker. Social work response, advocate for culturally safe and anti-racist healthcare support. This is something that I do. Yes, I'm black, but then again, I I think like before the white people start seeing that, all the race start seeing that they need to support the black, they need to see us working for ourselves, and that is one thing I do. I support the black. I support all race. Okay, no disparity, no differences, no unequal treatments. Okay, and then the next is the goal: empower black communities, promote equitable access to healthcare, and improve health outcomes through advocacy, policy reform, and culturally responsive practice. Criminal justice system. One, systemic racism. Black Canadians face discrimination across policies, court sentencing, court sentencing, and incarceration due to institutional policies and practices. And that was written by Owusu Benfa. The next is the racial profiling. Yeah, black people are disproportionately stopped, searched, and subjected, even in the airports, anywhere. Sometimes they just look at you in a very discriminating way, which is actually not good. Carding and street checks. Black residents were disproportionately targeted in Toronto. And then even in the court, sometimes they are misjudged, and because they are black, they are not being treated well. They just sentence them unfairly, and then their community impact. Discrimination contributes to racial trauma, chronic stress, mistrust of institutions, and barriers to employment, housing, and reintegration. Next is, so what is the social work response? Number one, advocate for anti-racist policies, restorative justice, diversion programs, and policy reform to reduce systemic inequality. And the next is promote Afrocentric, community-led, and culturally responsive approaches that strengthen Black communities. Yeah, Black communities need to be created, especially for the I know that I am aware that there are black communities in almost everywhere, but especially in the urban cities. But in the remote cities, we don't really have that kind of support that much. That much. So I think there should be more organizations like this in more communities rather like this in the remote cities. The next is education. It's just and which is totally unfair. Disproportionate schools and school discipline, black students are more likely to be suspended or expelled, and not just expelled alone. Sometimes when people commit crimes that maybe, for example, you have white people commit the same crime, or people of a particular country of that country commit that same crime, and another a black person commit that other crime, they have a higher chance of being deported, while they themselves they just remain in their country. Which is totally unfair. Yeah, I know you don't deport them to anywhere, but why didn't you just give like equal just like equal judgment to them, right? Then the next is the Ontario Human Rights Commission. Confirm black students face disproportionate discipline linked to disparities, you know, to racial stereotypes, educator bias, and systemic anti-black racism. Representation matters. Few black teachers, principals, and administrators. Yeah, this happens in schools. Students go through this racism. Even our professors, our teachers, they still one way or the other go through, this. And I really do not want to cite an example, but I've heard of cases where I read on online where black teachers are being mocked by their fellow professors, fellow colleagues that are professors. Black professors are also being mocked, like maybe because, especially when this person wants to speak about something, the impact on black on blacks, it's actually not good. It has ways of affecting the students and the students and also the professors, right? Uh, so what are the social work responses? The social workers that work in school should challenge discriminatory discipline policies, advocate for equitable educational practices, and then support culturally responsive mental health services, and then promote inclusive curriculum, work with black families and communities. So Afrocentric social work perspective, it focuses on cultural identity, collective belongings, community strength, resilience, and they move away from deficit-based perspective, partner with black communities to remove institutional barriers. And these are some of my takeaways. You can actually read that. Next is the environmental racism and anti-black institutional racism in Canada. So what is environmental racism? Racialized communities are disproportionately exposed to pollution, environmental hazards, and unsafe living conditions caused by discriminatory land use, urban planning, and government policies, reflects systemic inequalities in whose health, safety, well-being are prioritized. Historical context. Black communities were often located in areas with fewer resources and political influence. Environmental inequality is systemic, not accidental, rooted in colonialism, slavery, segregation, and economic exclusion. So these are so for my case study, we have the Afriville, Nova Scotia, historic black community neglected by government, surrounded by landfill, sewage facilities, hospitals, and industrial sites demolished in the 1960s, causing displacement, loss of cultural identity and community. And then Lincolnville also experienced something similar. For them, it's located in the landfill and industrial waste. Residents have raised long-standing concerns about environmental health. So one way or the other, um, blacks still undergo through racism in the environment. Okay. So what are some of the social work responses? Uh, like so these are the impacts of racism on the health and social impacts, right, on Black people. And then these are the environmental racism. The next is social work responses to anti-Black institutional racism. One, the Afrocentric social work practice centers African and Black histories, cultures, community strengths, promote cultural identity, collective healing, resilience, and empowerment, collaborate with Black-led organizations, and provides culturally safe, trauma-informed support. So we have the structural social work, which recognizes and advocates reforms in healthcare, education, justice, and employment. Challenges systemic barriers and supports equity through institutional change. And then the next is the anti-oppressive social work practice. It examines power, privilege, and systemic oppression within social services, challenges discriminatory policies and practices that disadvantage Black communities. It also promotes culturally safe, equitable, and inclusive services across all sectors. And the next is the anti-racist social work practice. Actively confronts and dismantles institutional racism rather than simply celebrating diversity. Supports anti-racism policies, race-based data collection, and increased Black representation in leadership. Workers in partnership in Black community recognizes their leadership resilience and self-determination. So this is my references. These are my references. Um, yeah. Thank you for your attention, and I hope that you learned. Um, you can just go back, read through each of the slides one after the other, and then and then I'm sure that. And if you have any question, feel free to ask me. And thank you for watching. My, sorry. Thank you for watching my presentation and my YouTube channel. Please feel free to like, comment, subscribe. Thank you. Bye.